We are beginning our hand illustration in Medical Illustration, and we're going to review drawing with a grid and talk about thumbnails. So yesterday we began working with the idea that we were making a 3-layer or 3-part illustration, and those of the human hand, right? And so the 3 parts that we are going to be including in our illustration is the actual hand, right? The exterior, the part we can all see. We are going to do the muscles and the tendons of the hand, and we're going to do the bones of the hand. So it will be a 3-part illustration. It will also need to have a text and a title. So in terms of the visual information that you have to plan for, those are the components that the illustration will include. The composition of the illustration is up to you. So we looked at a few examples. You can be as straightforward with this illustration as you, or as creative with this illustration as you want. And so when I was planning my illustration, I was thinking about little different ways that I could do it. I could use my page vertically, draw my hands fairly small, and include them all in the same illustration. This, like I said, my drawings end up really small, and I end up with just minimal room for adding like text. So it is one that I would use with caution, right? In some of my other thumbnail sketches, I had a prop. So here I was thinking about using a paintbrush. I have a couple of options with a feather, and it is ultimately the one of the ones with the feather that I decided I liked the best. And I also have a reference photo. So I actually have a feather here, and I held the feather in my hand and took a photograph of my hand using my camera. It doesn't matter to me if you draw your left hand or your right hand. Either way works, right? You can have a buddy if you want to use both of your hands in your illustration. You could have a family member or a friend take the photograph for you, or you could use the front-facing camera in Google Classroom. And that is something that you should have done already as well. So next steps for me is to actually look at my photograph and plan my illustration, also including text. So you can see I have a little thumbnail sketch that I've made here. My actual illustration, my actual image, the feather is here. It covers some of my fingers. This one is over the top, and then the rest go kind of behind. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, that's enough fingers. And you can see I've just made a super rough sketch of that. This is what my page will look like. I have planned that I'm going to use my paper up and down. You can use your paper in either direction. I need to have a title. So you can see I have planned for there to be a title here. I will need 2 sets of text, right? So I'm planning where my text is going to go in relationship to my illustration. So check, I've got my title. I am going to need a group of text labels for the bones of the hand. And so I'm imagining that those labels could go here in kind of a box, right? And I'm going to need a group of labels for my muscles and tendons. And I'm also planning on those going here. So you can see I'm kind of planning ahead for my text layers, where they're gonna go in relationship to my hand illustration. That way, when all of the parts of my drawing, because only one portion of this drawing will end up on drawing paper, the other 3 portions will end up on the translucent paper that's in your supply kit. So I do need to kind of plan ahead for where those things are going to go, okay? If I think back to when we talked about graphic design, right? And I'm thinking about a grid that I would have 4 quarters. I'm going to fill 2 quarters with text. My hand goes through the other 2 quarters. And so that is something also that you can consider. And that brings us back to when we did that personal poster design. Remember, we talked about grid-based design. So it's super important that I do this before I move on to the next section. Next section is I'm going to be taking my sketchbook sheet and I'm going to be making a sheet of basically graph paper. I'm going to be making 1-inch boxes on this sheet. So you can see here I have my sketchbook paper. I'm going to work from the edge of the sheet to the folds, which should be 9 inches. I'm gonna make a little mark at the top at every inch. The inch marker on this ruler is the thickest of the lines, and it's the one that has the little number by it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just work my way, making that little mark all the way across my page, making sure to hold my ruler at the edge of the paper. I am then going to come down here to the bottom edge of my paper, line my ruler up again, and do the exact same thing. Very carefully lining my pencil up with the mark by the number. I am then going to connect the marks. Going to find my first mark and use my ruler and draw a line. We are working in our sketchbook instead of on our final paper, just so we can make some mistakes, right? We will move this illustration out to a sheet of our final paper, and then we won't need the grid boxes anymore. But what this grid will allow me to do is just like when we worked earlier with the skull, in that grid is going to allow me to draw as accurately as possible. So I have vertical columns now that are 1 inch wide. I am now going to do the same thing up and down. So I'm lining my ruler up with the edge of my paper. My paper is 12 inches tall, and I'm just going to make a little mark again by the biggest line with the number on the right hand side of my page. I'm going to do it again on the left hand side of my page, making sure that the edge of the ruler is lined up. And I'm going to connect those dots as well to make 1 inch boxes on my sheet of sketchbook paper to get ready to make my final illustration. So these are the first 2 steps in preparation for making this illustration. Is I'm going to make my grid. Going to make my grid, so I'm going to grid my sheet, and those are 1 inch boxes. 1 inch. And I'm going to plan my page with the text. So these are the first 2 steps in preparation for creating our hand illustration.